morning. This is page 423, chapter 6, The Good Life in Exile. There's a list here. 1 through 11. Bicycle nails, 1/2 kilo. Shoe, 5. Ashpan, 2. Galoshes, 10. Pencil case, child's, 1. Globe, 1. Match, 50 boxes. Bat lamp, 2. Toothpaste, 8. Gingerbread, 34 kilos. Vodka, 156 half liters. This was the list of all goods in stock and due for repricing in the general store at the village of Adderley. Inspectors and stockers of the Cockterek District Consumer Cooperative, RIPO, had drawn up the list, and I was now turning the handle of a calculating machine and reducing the prices of some items by 7.5 and of others by 1.5%. Prices were plunging alarmingly, and it was to be expected that both pencil case and globe would be sold before the new school year began, that the nails would find a home in bicycles, and that only the great gingerbread pile, probably pre-war, was on its way down into the category of unsaleable stocks. As for the vodka, even if the price went up, it wouldn't outlast May Day. The price reductions, according to Stalinist custom, took place in time for April 1st, and by the toilers gained so many million rubles, and by which the toilers gained so many million rubles. Full benefit was calculated and published in advance. Hit me hard. By then, I had spent a whole month in exile, going through all I had earned in the self-financing foundry at Ch06, a free man supporting myself on Gulag money, and calling regularly at the district education department to try to find out whether they would take me on. But the snake-like director had stopped receiving me. The two fat inspectors could scarcely find the time to growl at me, and toward the end of the month, I was shown a ruling from the Oblast Education Department that all schools in Cockterek District were fully staffed with math teachers, and there was no possibility of finding me work. Meanwhile, I had been writing a play, Decemberists Without December, about having to go through the morning and evening body searches, and with no need to destroy what I had written at short intervals as I used to. I had no other occupation, and after camp I liked it that way. Once a day I went to the tea room and ate some hot broth for 2 rubles, the same thin soup they sent out in a bucket for the prisoners in the local jail. Coarse black bread was sold freely in the local shop. I had bought potatoes and even a lump of pork fat. I myself had brought a donkey load of underbrush from the thickets so that I could light my cooking stove if I liked. My happiness was not far from complete. I thought to myself, if they won't give me a job, they needn't. Why, while my money lasts, if they won't give me a job, while my money lasts, I'll go on writing my play. I may never have so much freedom again. When I was least expecting it, one of the 3 commandants crooked a finger at me in the street. He took me to the Raipo, the office of the director, a Kazakh as round as a cannonball, and said with solemn emphasis, "The mathematician." What miracle was this? No one asked me why. I had been inside, or gave me forms and curricula vitae to fill in. There and then, his secretary, an exiled Greek girl of cinematic beauty, tapped out with one finger an order appointing me a planning officer with a salary of 450 rubles a month. That same day, 2 other unplaced exiles were assigned to the Raipo with just as little formality, with no forms to fill in for leisurely study. Vasilenko, the ocean-going ship's captain, and someone I did not yet know, and the very reserved Grigory Samoilovich M. Vasilenko was already nursing a plant to deepen the river Chu. Cows could afford it in the summer months, and introduce a motorboat service. He had asked the command post to let him go and survey the channel. Captain Mann, his classmate at navigation school and on the training brig Tovarishit, was just at that time fitting out the ob for a voyage to the Antarctic, but Vasilenko was packed off to the Raipo as a storeman. But we were not wanted as planners or storemen or ledger clerks. All 3 of us were thrown into a deal with an emergency, the repricing of goods. On the night of March 31st, April 1st, year in and year out, the Raipo was in the throes of despair, and there never were and never could be enough people. They had to make an inventory of all the goods and expose all the thieving salespeople, though not with a view to prosecution. Reprice them, and begin trading the very next day at the new prices, which were so very advantageous to the toilers. But the total length of all railways and high roads in our desert district was 0 kilometers, and shops out in the wilds just never could bring these new prices, so advantageous to the toiler, into operation before May 1st. For a month solid, all shops stopped trading altogether, while the lists were being reckoned up, confirmed by the Raipo, and delivered by camel. But in the district center itself, trade could simply not be disrupted just before May Day. By the time we arrived at Raipo, 15 people, permanent staff and temporaries, were already working on it. Every desk was sheeted with inventories on rough paper, and nothing could be heard but the clicking of abacuses, on which the expert bookkeepers were both multiplying and dividing, a business-like exchange of abuse. They sat us down to work once more. I was fed up with multiplying and dividing on paper, and I asked for a calculating machine. There wasn't a single one in the Raipo, and anyway, some of them knew how to use. None of them knew how to use such a thing. But someone remembered seeing some sort of gadget with fingers in a cupboard at the district statistics administration, only nobody there used it either. They telephoned, went over, and came back with it. I started worrying and quickly jotting down rows of figures. while the senior bookkeepers glowered at me, wondering whether I was a rival. I just turned my handle and thought to myself how quickly a thick gets cheeky, or, putting it in literary language, how quickly a man's requirements grow. I was dissatisfied because they had torn me away from the play I was writing and in my dark hovel, dissatisfied because they had not given me a job in school, dissatisfied because they had forced me to what? To dig in frozen soil, to mix mud for bricks with my bare feet in icy water. No, they had forcibly put me at a clean desk to turn the handle of a calculating machine and enter figures and columns. At the beginning of my time in the camps, they had ordered me to do this blissful work 12 hours a day without pay for as long as I wanted, for as long as I was inside. I should have been beside myself with joy. As it was, they were paying me 450 rubles for it. I should be able to drink a liter of milk every day, and I was turning up my nose and wanting more. The rival had been bogged down in a repricing exercise for a week. Each of them had to be put in right category for the overall price reduction. The reclassified for the rural price differential, and still not a single shop could be trading. Then these obese chairmen, who beat all the rest for idleness, assembled us all in his purely ceremonial office and said, "Right, listen. According to the latest findings of medical science, nobody needs 8 hours sleep anymore. 4 hours are absolutely adequate. So these are my orders. You'll start to work at 7 a.m., finish at 2 a.m., 1 hour's break for dinner and 1 for supper." As far as I could tell, not one of us was amused rather than awed by the stupefying outburst. We all shrank ourselves, said nothing, plucked up our courage only to discuss the best time for the supper break. This was it, the Exile's lot, of which I have been warned. It was made up of orders just like this. All those sitting there were exiles, trembling for their jobs. If they were dismissed, it would be a long time before they found anything else in Ch06. And anyway, it was not for the director personally, it was for the country. It had to be done, even though the latest findings of medical science, they even thought the latest findings of medical science quite reasonable. Oh, how I longed to get up and jeer that self-satisfied hog, to relieve my feelings just for once. But that it would have been anti-Soviet agitation, pure and simple, inciting people to sabotage an operation of major importance. You go through life from stage to stage, schoolboy, student, citizen, soldier, prisoner, exile, and it is always the same. The bosses are always too heavy, too strong for you, and you must bow down and keep silent. If he had said until 10 in the evening, I would have stayed, but he was ordering us to face bloodless execution, ordering me in this place, where I was free, to stop writing. Oh no, to hell with you. And with the price reductions. My camp experience suggested a way out, not to answer back, but quietly to do the opposite. I tamely listened to the order with the rest of them, but at 5 o'clock I rose from my desk and left, and I did not return until 9 in the morning. All my colleagues were sitting there, counting or pretending to count. They looked at me as though I were crazy. Initial M, who secretly approved of my behavior but dared not imitate me, informed me privately that the boss had stood over my empty desk screaming that he would drive me 100 kilometers into the desert. I admit that my heart was in my boots. The MVD could, of course, do anything. They could easily chase me out there. 100 kilometers, why not? And I would have seen the last of the district center. But I was born lucky. I had landed on the archipelago after the war, missing the most lethal period, and now I had arrived in exile after Stalin's death. In the past month, something new had crept through, even our local MVD command. Almost imperceptibly, a new time was beginning, the mildest 3 years in the history of the archipelago. The chairman did not summon me or come to see me. I finished the day's work still fresh and dozing and delirious people all around me, and I decided to leave at 5 in the evening again. I didn't care how it ended, as long as it was quick. How often in my life have I observed in man that a man can safely sacrifice a great deal as long as he clings to the essential. The play which I had been carrying within me, even in the special camp at hard labor, I refused to sacrifice, and I triumphed. For a whole week, they all worked nights, and they got used to my empty desk. Even the chairman just looked the other way when he passed me in the corridor. But it was not my destiny to bring order into the rural cooperatives of Kazakhstan. A young Kazakh, head of a teaching department, suddenly appeared in the RIPO. Until I appeared, he had been the only university graduate in Kokterek. Until I appeared, he had been the only university graduate in Kokterek, and very proud of it. My arrival, however, did not arouse his envy. Whether he wanted to reinforce his school before the first batch of pupils took their final exam, or to vex the snake-like director of the education department, I don't know. But he ordered me to bring your diploma along quickly. I ran home like a schoolboy to fetch it. He put it in his pocket and went off to a trade union conference. In Djambo. 3 days later, he looked in again and laid before me an extract from an order made by the Oblast Education Department over the same shameless signature which had certified in March that the schools in the district were fully staffed. I was now, in April, appointed to teach both math and physics to both graduating classes, and just 3 weeks before their final examination, he was taking a chance with Director of Studies. This director, not so much politically, what he had to fear was that I might have forgotten all my mathematics during my years in the camps. When the day of the written examination in geometry and trigonometry arrived, did not allow me to open the envelope in the presence of my pupils, but took all the teachers into the headmaster's office and stood over me while I solved a problem. The fact that my answers coincided with those in the envelope put him and the other math teachers in a festive mood. It was easy enough to pass for a second Descartes in that place. I still had to learn that every year during the final examinations, there were periodic calls from the villages to the district center. We can't work it out. It wasn't formulated properly. The teachers themselves had only 7 years of schooling behind them. Shala described the happiness it gave me to go into the classroom and pick up the chalk. This was really the day of my release, my restoration of my citizenship, the restoration. I stopped noticing all the other things which made up the life of an exile. When I was in incapacitates, our column was often marched past a local school. I would look upon it as some inaccessible paradise, at the children running about the yard, at the teachers in bright dresses, and the tinkle of the bell from the front steps cut me to the heart. I had been reduced to such desperate longing by my hopeless prison years, my years of general labor in the camps. It seemed to me the supreme, heartbreaking happiness to enter a classroom carrying a register as that bell rang, and start a lesson with the mysterious air of one about to unfold wonders. This was, of course, my teacher's gift, craving satisfaction, but partly perhaps my hunger for self-esteem. I needed the contrast after years of humiliation, years of knowing that my talents were unwanted. But while my gaze was fixed on the life of the archipelago and the stage at large, I had lost sight of something very elementary, that sometime during or since the war, the Soviet school had died. It no longer existed. There remained only a bloated corpse, a bag of wind. In the capital and in the hamlet, the schools were dead. Excuse me. When spiritual death creeps through the land like poison gas, the school and its pupils are, of course, among the first to suffocate. Yet I only discovered this some years later, when I returned from the land of exile to metropolitan Russia. In Ch06, I had no inkling of it. In the deadly fog of obscuration all around us, the exiled children had not yet choked. They still lived. Those were very special children. They were growing up in the consciousness of their depressed status. In school council meetings and other waffling sessions, they were described sometimes heard themselves described as Soviet children, growing up to live under communism, whose freedom of movement was only temporarily restricted, no more than that. But they felt, every one of them felt the collar around his neck. He had felt it from early childhood, as long as he could remember. The whole world which they knew, from magazines and films, so varied, so rich, bubbling with life, was inaccessible to them, and there was no hope of entering it, even for the boys, through the army. There was a very faint chance that a very few would obtain permission from the MPD post to go to a city, to be allowed, when they got there, to take an entrance examination, to be admitted to an institute, if they passed, and once in, to complete their studies successfully, so that all the world's discoveries they would ever make about the vast, inexhaustible world must be made there, in the school, which for many years was the beginning and end of their education. Moreover, life in the wilderness was so starkly simple that they were free from the distractions and dissipations which spoil the 20th century urban youth, from Lunda to Alma-Ata. In the urban centers, children lost the habit and the taste for study as though discharging an irksome obligation, just to stay on the books till they were old enough to leave. But for the children in our exile colonies, if they were well taught, there was nothing more important in life, nothing else mattered. Studying avidly, they felt that they were rising above their second-class status, competing on equal terms with first-class children. Only in earnest study could they slake their ambitions. No, there were other ways. By holding elective office in school in the Commonwealth and from the age of 16 at the polls in general elections, how they longed, poor things, for the illusion of equal rights, if nothing more. Many proudly joined the Commonwealth and made sincere political declarations in their 5-minute speeches. I tried to instill into one German girl, Victoria Nuts, who had won a place in a 2-year teacher's training college, the idea that an exile should be proud of her position, not distressed by it. It was hopeless. She looked at me as though I had gone mad. Of course, there were others who did not hurry into the Commonwealth. They were hauled in forcibly. You still haven't joined, although you're allowed to. Now why is that? In Kuchtarek, some of the young girls, Germans, members of a clandestine religious sect, were compelled to join to save their parents from being driven farther out into the desert. Whoso shall offend one of these little ones, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck. I have been speaking all this time about the Russian classes in the Kuchtarek school. There were scarcely any Russians proper among them. They were Germans, Greeks, Koreans, a few Kurds and Chechens, some Ukrainians from families which had settled in the region at the beginning of the century, and Kazakhs whose parents had responsible posts and wanted their children educated in Russian. But most of the Kazakh children were in the Kazakh classes. They were, in very truth, still savages, and the most of them, those who were not corrupted by the high standing of their families, were very straightforward, sincere, with a sound sense of good and evil, until false or conceited teachers perverted it. In fact, nearly all teaching in Kazakh was merely the propagation of ignorance. The first generation, dragged with difficulty through their diploma course, half-educated and hugely self-important, disturbed to instruct the rising generation, while Kazakh girls left the schools and teachers' training colleges with satisfactory marks in spite of their utter and impenetrable ignorance, so that when these barely civilized children caught a glimpse of real teaching, they drank it in, not just with their eyes and ears, but with their open mouths. With such receptive children, I reveled in my teaching duties at Kuchtarek, and for 3 years this sufficed to keep me happy, and perhaps it would have done so for many years longer. There were not hours enough in the timetable for me to correct or to make up for the mistakes and omissions of the past, so I prescribed anatomical observations, and they turned up in greater numbers and higher spirits than if they had been going to the cinema. And I was also put in charge of a class, a purely Kazakh class, and that even this was most enjoyable. However, the bright side was bounded by a classroom door and the lesson bell. In the staff common room, the director's office, and the district education department, the atmosphere was besmirched, not just with the petty tyranny universal in our state, but with a more pernicious variety peculiar to the land of exile. When I arrived, there were already some Germans and some administrative exiles among the teachers. We were all in the same oppressed situation. Every opportunity was taken to remind us that we were allowed to teach on sufferance, and that this favor could always be withdrawn. The exiles on the staff, even more than other teachers, though they too were just as dependent, dreaded angering the high officials in the district by failing to give their children good marks. They dreaded too angering the authorities with poor examination results and deliberately marking too high, making their own contribution to the propagation of ignorance in Kazakhstan at large. Apart from this, special dues and duties fell upon exiled teachers and also their young Kazakh colleagues. 25 rubles were deducted every day. For those who benefit, nobody knew. The headmaster, Berdnov, might suddenly announce that it was his little daughter's birthday and the teachers would have to contribute 50 rubles each for a present. Apart from this, one or another education department of the teachers would be called to the headmaster's office or the education department and asked for a loan of 300 to 500 rubles. These things, however, were typical of the local style of system. Kazakh pupils were forced to give a sheep or half a sheep each for the graduation ceremony. Those who did were assured of their certificates, even if they were completely ignorant. The graduation party would turn into a great booze-up for the district party activists. In addition, all the district bosses were taking correspondence courses, and teachers in our school were forced to complete all the written tests for them. The orders were transmitted as though from feudal lords through the directors of studies, and the teacher serfs were not even vouchsafed a look at their external students. I don't know whether it was firmness on my part, made possible by my irreplaceability, which became immediately obvious, or whether it was the milder climate of the time, or perhaps both, that helped me keep my neck out of this harness. My pupils would be eager to learn only as long as I marked honestly, and I did so, with no thought for district secretaries, nor did I pay any levies or make any loans to the bosses. The snaky head of the education department had the impudence to ask, I thought it quite enough that the needy state pleased us, a month's salary every May. Exile had restored to us the free man's privilege denied us in the camps of subscribing to the state loan, but my concern for principle stopped there. I worked side by side with the biology and chemistry teacher, Georgy Stepanovich Mitrovich, a Serb who had done a tenor on the Kolyma for counter-revolutionary Trotskyite activity, and who, though now old and sick, fought doggedly for justice in the local affairs of Kokhtarek. Dismissed from the district health department, he had nonetheless been taken on by the school and had transferred his efforts there. Indeed, wherever you looked in Kokhtarek, there was lawlessness aggravated by ignorance, barbaric conceit, and smug clannishness. This lawlessness was dark and a dark and tangled thicket, but Mitrovich fought selflessly and disinterestedly against it, with Lenin's name on his lips, it is true. Exposed the corrupt at teachers' meetings and district teachers' conferences, failed ignorant high-ranking external students, and one cheap graduating students wrote complaints to the Oblast Center to Alma-Ata, sent telegrams to Khrushchev in person. 70 parent signatures were collected for appeals on his behalf, and such telegrams were dispatched in another district because they would not have got through for months. He demanded checkups, inspections, then, when inspections arrived and turned against him, he would start writing again. He was analyzed at special teachers' meetings, accused of filling children with anti-Soviet propaganda, and came within a hairbrush of arrest, accused no less seriously of ill-treating the goats that browsed on the young pioneers' garden plots. He was dismissed and reinstated. He tried to get compensation for enforced absence from work. He was transferred to another school, refused to go, was dismissed again. But he put up a splendid fight. If only I had joined him, what a drubbing we would have given them. Yes, I gave him no help at all. I held my peace. I always avoided taking part in the final vote so as not to be against him, but slipping away to a club meeting or a tutorial. In this way, I did nothing to prevent the external students with party cards from obtaining pass marks. They were the regime. Let them cheat the regime of which they were part. I had my own concerns to keep secret. I was writing and writing. I was saving myself for a different struggle later on. But there's a larger question to be answered. Was Mitrovich's struggle right? Was it necessary? Good chapter. Thank you for listening. Have a good one.